The air in the Kingdom Hall always felt heavy, like it carried the weight of every whispered prayer and every unspoken sin. I was just a boy back then, clutching my copy of Learning from the Great Teacher, my small hands trembling under the starched collar of my Sunday shirt. My name is Thomas Mitchell, but you can call me Tom. I'm 67 years old now, born in 1958 in a small town called Willow Creek, tucked away in the Midwest of the United States. For over 3 decades, I believed I was part of God's chosen people, raised in the truth, as my parents called it. But what I found in that truth broke me in ways I'm still piecing together. Today, I want to share a story that's been locked in my heart for years, a story of faith, betrayal, and the courage to face a darkness no one wanted to see. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop it in the comments below. It warms my heart to think my voice is reaching so many corners of the world, from big cities to quiet towns like the one I grew up in. And if you feel moved by this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to keep sharing these painful but necessary truths. It was the late 1960s, and Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. The town had about 10,000 souls, a main street with a diner that smelled of greasy bacon and burnt coffee, and a Kingdom Hall on the edge of town, its windows always shut tight. My parents, John and Margaret Mitchell, were devout Jehovah's Witnesses. Dad worked at the local hardware store, his hands rough from handling tools and lumber. Mom stayed home, baking bread that filled our small house with a warm, yeasty scent and sewing dresses for the sisters in the congregation. Our life revolved around the Kingdom Hall, 3 meetings a week, field service on Saturdays, and assemblies twice a year. I can still hear the creak of the wooden pews, the rustle of Bible pages, and the low hum of hymns sung in perfect unison. I was 9 years old when I first felt the weight of being in the truth. Every Sunday I'd sit in the Kingdom Hall, my tie too tight, my shoes polished to a shine, listening to the elders talk about Armageddon. "Jehovah sees everything, Thomas," my mother would say, her voice soft but firm. "Every thought, every action. Be pure, or you won't survive." I believed her. I believed that God was watching, waiting for me to slip. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling of my bedroom, whispering prayers to Jehovah, begging him to make me good enough. The fear was like a shadow, always there, even in the sunlight. Our house was a modest 3-bedroom with a sagging porch and a backyard where Mom grew tomatoes and snap peas. The smell of her cooking, roast chicken on Fridays, oatmeal cookies on special days, mixed with the faint scent of furniture polish she used to keep the place spotless. Dad would come home at 6 sharp, his boots leaving dirt on the mat by the door. We'd sit at the kitchen table, a faded green tablecloth under our plates, and talk about the meetings or the latest Watchtower article. Life felt safe, predictable, holy. But there was something else, something I didn't have words for then, a quiet unease, a sense that the perfection we chased hid something darker. It was around 1970, when I was 12, that I met Brother David Harper. He was an elder, a man in his 40s, with a deep voice and a smile that made you feel seen. Everyone admired him. "Brother David is a pillar in the congregation," my father said one evening, slicing into a piece of Mom's meatloaf. "He's got Jehovah's spirit." David was tall, with neatly combed hair and a suit that always looked pressed. He'd stand at the podium, quoting scriptures with such confidence that I thought he must talk to Jehovah himself. When he started paying attention to me, I felt special. "Thomas, you've got potential," he said one Sunday after the meeting, his hand resting on my shoulder. "How about some private Bible study, just you and me?" I remember the moment clearly. We were in the Kingdom Hall's foyer, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint perfume of the sisters' hairspray. My parents beamed with pride. "That's a blessing, son," Mom whispered, smoothing my hair. I nodded, my chest swelling with a mix of excitement and nerves. Private study with an elder? That was an honor. I thought it meant Jehovah saw something in me. I didn't know then that those studies would change everything, my faith, my family, my entire world. The first study was innocent enough. We sat in a small room at the back of the Kingdom Hall, a cramped space with a single window covered by a heavy curtain. The table was cluttered with Watchtower magazines and a worn Bible. David read from Psalms, his voice steady, almost hypnotic. "Jehovah loves those who are faithful," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You want to make him proud, don't you, Thomas?" I nodded, clutching my book, my palms sweaty. But there was something in his tone, a weight I couldn't name, that made my stomach twist. Over the next few weeks, the studies changed. David started closing the door. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He'd sit closer, his knee brushing against mine. I'd stare at the floor, my heart pounding, not understanding why I felt so wrong. One day he placed his hand on my leg and said, "This is our little secret, Thomas. Jehovah tests us in ways we don't always understand." I froze. The words stuck in my throat, heavy as stones. I wanted to run, to tell my parents, but fear kept me silent. They trusted David. Everyone did, and I was just a boy. Looking back, I see the signs I missed. The way David's smile never reached his eyes, the way the elders always deferred to him, the way the congregation seemed to orbit around his authority. I didn't know then that the truth I was raised to believe in could hide such ugliness. But that was just the beginning. The real pain came later, when I tried to speak and found that the truth was the last thing anyone wanted to hear. The Kingdom Hall was the heartbeat of our world in Willow Creek, a small town in the Midwest where the 1970s unfolded slowly, like the pages of a well-worn watchtower. I was Thomas Mitchell, a boy of 12, when this story truly took root, though the seeds of my unraveling were planted long before. My life was a rhythm of meetings, field service, and prayers whispered into the stillness of my bedroom. At 67, looking back, I see a boy who wanted nothing more than to please Jehovah, to be good enough for the paradise we were promised. But the weight of that expectation and the secrets it hid shaped me in ways I'm still untangling. Willow Creek in the early 1970s was a place of quiet routines. The town's main street had a barber shop with a red and white pole, a grocery store where the clerk knew your order by heart, and a diner where the smell of fried onions clung to the air. Our house, a modest clapboard with peeling white paint, sat on a street lined with maple trees. The creak of our front porch swing and the hum of cicadas on summer evenings were the soundtrack of my childhood. Inside, Mom kept everything spotless. Her hands always smelled of lemon-scented cleaner, and the kitchen table bore the faint scratches of years of family dinners. Dad's toolbox sat in the corner, its metallic tang mixing with the aroma of Mom's baking. We were simple people, bound by faith and the unspoken rule that Jehovah's truth came first. My parents, John and Margaret Mitchell, were the anchors of my world. Dad was a tall man with calloused hands from years at the hardware store. He'd come home at 6, his flannel shirt carrying the scent of sawdust, and read the daily text with us before dinner. His voice was steady, unwavering, as he quoted scriptures about obedience and purity. "Jehovah's watching, Thomas," he'd say, his eyes kind but firm. "Stay on the narrow path." Mom was softer, her hands quick with a needle and thread, sewing modest dresses for the sisters. She'd hum hymns while cooking, her apron dusted with flour, and her smile could make you believe everything would be okay. But there was a tension in her, too, a fear of falling short, of not being enough for Jehovah. I inherited that fear, though I didn't know it then. The congregation was our extended family, a tight-knit group of about 50 souls who met in a plain brick building on the edge of town. The Kingdom Hall smelled of polished wood and old hymnals. its windows frosted to keep the world out. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, we'd file in, dressed in our best. Men in suits, women in long skirts, children like me in starched shirts that itched at the neck. The elders, men like Brother David Harper, were the pillars of our faith. David was in his mid-40s, with a commanding presence and a voice that carried authority. His suits were always crisp, his tie knotted perfectly, and his Bible was marked with notes in precise handwriting. When he spoke from the podium, quoting Revelation or Psalms, the room fell silent. "Brother David is anointed," the sisters would whisper, their eyes shining with admiration. I wanted to be like him someday, respected, chosen, close to Jehovah, but David's attention toward me, which started as a privilege, became something else. The private Bible studies in that small back room grew heavier, the air thick with something I couldn't name. The room was sparse, a folding table, 2 chairs, a stack of Watchtower magazines. The single bulb overhead cast shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. David would sit too close, his breath smelling faintly of mint, his hand lingering on my arm, as he read scriptures about loyalty. "Jehovah tests us, Thomas," he said one afternoon, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're strong enough for this, aren't you?" I nodded, my throat tight, not understanding why my skin crawled. I was 12, taught to obey, to trust the elders. Doubting him felt like doubting Jehovah himself. My best friend in the congregation was Samuel, a wiry boy with freckles and a quick laugh. We'd sit together during meetings, passing notes when the elders weren't looking, or race each other to the creek after field service. Samuel's family was stricter than mine. His father, Brother Amos, was an elder with a stern face and a belt he wasn't afraid to use. Samuel never talked about it, but I saw the way he flinched when his father raised his voice. "Just keep your head down," Samuel told me once, as we sat on the creek bank, tossing pebbles into the water. "Do what they say, and you'll be fine." His words stuck with me, a quiet warning I didn't fully grasp. Samuel was my ally, the one person who made the rigid world of the congregation feel bearable, but even he couldn't see what was happening in that back room. The antagonism in my story wasn't just David, it was the system itself, the unspoken rules that kept us silent. The congregation taught us that questioning an elder was questioning Jehovah. If you spoke out, you risked being labeled a troublemaker, or worse, an apostate. The elders held power not just over our faith, but over our lives, our friendships, our families, our very thoughts. My parents, devout as they were, saw David as a servant of God, incapable of wrong. When I tried to hint at my discomfort, Mom's face would tighten, and she'd say, "Thomas, focus on your spiritual goals. Don't let Satan plant doubts in your heart." Her words, meant to comfort, felt like chains. There were objects that became symbols in my mind, anchors to those years. My copy of Learning from the Great Teacher was one, a hardcover book with colorful illustrations, its pages worn from constant use. I'd trace the pictures of children in paradise, imagining a world without fear. Another was the small wooden cross my grandmother, a Catholic who never joined the Witnesses, gave me before she passed. I kept it hidden in a sock drawer, afraid to touch it but unable to throw it away. It was a reminder of a world outside the kingdom hall, a world I was taught to fear. And then there was David's Bible, its leather cover soft from years of handling, its pages marked with his precise notes. That Bible, which should have been a source of comfort, became a symbol of my dread. As the months passed, the private studies continued, each one chipping away at the boy I was. I'd sit in the Kingdom Hall watching David at the podium, his voice ringing with conviction as he spoke about purity and faithfulness. The congregation would nod, their faces glowing with trust. I wanted to scream, to tell them what he was doing, but the fear of Jehovah's judgment, of my parents' disappointment, of being cast out, kept me silent. I'd go home, lie in bed, and stare at the ceiling, the hum of crickets outside my window mixing with the echo of David's words. "This is our secret, Thomas." One evening, after a study, I lingered in the Kingdom Hall's foyer, my hands shaking as I tied my shoes. Sister Clara, an older woman with kind eyes and a knitted shawl, noticed me. "You all right, Tommy?" she asked, her voice gentle, like the rustle of leaves. I wanted to tell her everything, but all I could manage was a nod. She patted my shoulder and said, "Jehovah sees your heart. Keep being a good boy." Her kindness was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to pull me out of the darkness. I walked home that night, the gravel crunching under my feet, the weight of silence pressing harder than ever. The congregation was my world, but it was also my cage. The rules, the expectations, the fear of Armageddon, they shaped every choice, every thought. I was taught to trust, to obey, to believe that Jehovah's organization was perfect. But perfection doesn't hide secrets, and I was beginning to see the cracks. Little did I know, those cracks would soon split wide open, forcing me to choose between the truth I was raised to believe and the truth screaming inside me. The Kingdom Hall in Willow Creek was more than a building. It was a fortress of faith, its brick walls holding secrets as tightly as they held prayers. I was Thomas Mitchell, a teenager by the mid-1970s, caught in a world where obedience to Jehovah meant everything. At 67 now, looking back, I see a boy torn between the truth he was raised to believe and the truth he was starting to feel, a truth that would soon demand a choice I wasn't ready to make. The air in our small Midwest town carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint tang of diesel from passing trucks. But inside the Kingdom Hall, it was always the same: polished wood, old hymnals, and the heavy weight of expectation. By 1975, I was 15, lanky and awkward, my voice cracking when I gave comments at meetings. The private Bible studies with Brother David Harper had continued, each one a knot in my chest I couldn't untie. The back room of the Kingdom Hall, with its single bulb and heavy curtain, felt like a prison. David's voice, once a source of pride, now made my skin crawl. "You're growing up, Thomas," he'd say, his hand resting on my shoulder, his fingers lingering too long. "Jehovah needs strong young men like you." I'd nod, my eyes fixed on the floor, counting the cracks in the linoleum to keep from screaming. The congregation saw him as a saint, a man whose every word carried Jehovah's truth. But I knew a different David, one who hid behind scriptures and smiles. My parents, John and Margaret, were oblivious, their faith unshakable. Dad would come home from the hardware store, his hands smelling of sawdust, and read the Watchtower aloud at dinner. Mom's eyes would shine with devotion as she nodded along, her apron still dusted with flour from baking. "Brother David says you're doing well in your studies," she'd say, her voice warm with pride. "You're on the right path, Tommy." I wanted to tell them, to shatter their trust in him, but the words stuck in my throat. What would they think of me? Would they believe me, or would they see Satan's influence in my accusations? The fear of losing them, of losing my place in the congregation, kept me silent. The congregation itself was a web of unspoken rules. Questioning an elder was unthinkable. Doubting the organization was a step toward apostasy. The elders, David, Brother Amos, and Brother Paul, held power over every aspect of our lives. They decided who was spiritually strong, who could serve as a ministerial servant, who was worthy of Jehovah's approval. At meetings, I'd sit in the back row, my copy of Learning from the Great Teacher worn at the edges, watching the sisters nod in agreement as David spoke from the podium. His voice was smooth, authoritative, quoting scriptures about purity and faithfulness. "Jehovah tests us to refine us," he'd say, his eyes scanning the room, sometimes landing on me. I'd look away, my heart pounding, the hymnal's faint musty smell mixing with the sister's perfume in the air. Samuel, my best friend, was still my anchor. We were inseparable, sneaking out to the creek after field service to skip stones or talk about anything but the meetings. He was 16 now, his freckles fading, his laugh quieter than it used to be. His father, Brother Amos, was stricter than ever, his belt a constant threat. One afternoon, as we sat by the creek, the water glinting in the late summer sun, Samuel tossed a pebble and said, "You seem different, Tom, like something's eating you." I wanted to tell him about David, about the back room, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I shrugged and said, "Just tired of all the rules." He nodded, his eyes distant. "Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." His words hung between us, a crack in the facade we'd both been taught to uphold. The weight of David's actions grew heavier with each study. I was 16 when I finally tried to speak up. It was a Thursday evening, after a meeting, the Kingdom Hall emptying as families chatted in the foyer. I lingered near the coat rack, my hands sweaty, my tie loosened. Sister Clara, the older woman with the kind eyes, noticed me. "Tommy, you look pale," she said, her voice soft as she adjusted her shawl. "Everything all right?" I opened my mouth, the truth clawing at my throat, but all I managed was, "I'm fine, Sister Clara, just thinking." She smiled, her hand gentle on my arm. "You're a good boy. Jehovah sees your heart." Her kindness was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to pull me out of the darkness. I went home that night, the gravel crunching under my shoes, the stars above Willow Creek sharp and cold. In my room, I pulled out the wooden cross my grandmother had given me, still hidden in my sock drawer. It was small, no bigger than my palm, its wood smooth from years of being held. I traced its edges, feeling like a traitor just for touching it. The witnesses taught that crosses were pagan, that the world outside was Satan's domain. But that cross felt like a whisper of something else, a world where I might not have to carry this secret alone. The turning point came in the late 1970s, when I was 17. I'd been studying with David for 5 years, and the weight of his actions was crushing me. I started avoiding the back room, making excuses to miss our sessions. David noticed. One Sunday after the meeting, he pulled me aside in the foyer. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the sister's hairspray. "Thomas," he said, his voice low, his smile tight. "You've been distant. Is something wrong?" My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Just busy," I mumbled. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. "Don't forget, Thomas. Jehovah sees everything." The words were a threat, cloaked in scripture, and they sent a chill down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of crickets outside my window mixed with the echo of David's voice. I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, my heart racing. I had to tell someone, but who? My parents? The elders? The congregation was a family, but it was also a machine, grinding down anyone who stepped out of line. I'd heard stories of brothers and sisters who'd been disfellowshipped, cut off from their families, their names whispered like curses. The fear of that fate kept me silent, but the truth was growing louder, demanding to be heard. The midpoint of my journey came in 1978 when I was 18. I was at a district assembly, a 3-day event in a nearby city. The convention hall was packed, the air heavy with the scent of sweat and starched suits. During a break, I overheard 2 sisters whispering in the hallway. "Did you hear about Brother David?" one said, her voice low. "They say he was too close with some of the young brothers." My heart stopped. I leaned closer, pretending to tie my shoe. "It's just gossip," the other sister replied, her tone sharp. "We don't spread rumors about anointed men." But the words lit a spark in me. I wasn't alone. Others had seen something, felt something. For the first time, I dared to hope that the truth might break free. I went back to Willow Creek, determined to act. I started paying attention, listening to the whispers in the congregation. There was a young brother, Michael, who'd stopped coming to meetings. I remembered him as a quiet boy, always reading his Bible, his eyes downcast. Rumor was he'd left the truth, but no one said why. I tracked him down at the diner where he worked, wiping tables in a faded apron. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking as I sat at the counter, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air. "Did something happen with Brother David?" He froze, his rag still in his hand, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. "Don't ask, Tom," he said quietly. "Just don't." His words were a confirmation, a crack in the wall of silence, but they also terrified me. If Michael wouldn't speak, how could I? The congregation's rules were suffocating. The elders preached unity, but it was a unity built on silence. I started questioning everything, the meetings, the field service, the endless rules about dress and speech. My parents noticed. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, the green tablecloth faded under our plates. Dad set down his fork and said, "Thomas, you're drifting. What's going on?" I wanted to tell him, to spill everything, but the fear of his disappointment stopped me. "Nothing, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "just trying to be faithful." He nodded, but his eyes were heavy with concern. The tension was building, both inside me and in the congregation. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way David's gaze lingered on other young brothers, the way some families stopped coming to meetings, their absences unexplained. The Kingdom Hall, once a place of comfort, felt like a maze of secrets. I'd walk its halls, the creak of the pews echoing in my ears, wondering who else carried the same burden I did. The truth was out there, but it was buried under layers of fear and faith. One night I found a letter tucked inside my Watchtower magazine, slipped there during a meeting. It was unsigned, written in shaky handwriting. "You're not alone. Speak when you're ready." My hands trembled as I read it, the paper crinkling in the quiet of my room. Who had written it? Sister Clara? Michael? Someone else who'd seen the truth? The letter was a spark, a sign that the silence might break. But it also meant someone else knew, and that knowledge was both a relief and a new kind of fear. The path to the climax was clear now. I couldn't keep silent forever. The congregation, my family, my faith, they were all I'd ever known, but they were built on a lie I couldn't ignore. David's actions, the elders' silence, the organization's unyielding rules, they were all part of a system that protected the wrong people. I was 18, on the cusp of manhood, and the choice was coming: stay silent and safe, or speak and risk everything. The weight of that choice pressed down on me, heavier than any scripture, as I walked the streets of Willow Creek, the night air cool against my skin, the stars above whispering of a truth I wasn't sure I could face. The Kingdom Hall in Willow Creek stood like a silent judge, its brick walls casting long shadows over my life. I was Thomas Mitchell, 18 years old in the late 1970s, standing at a crossroads I hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. At 67 now, reflecting on that moment, I see a young man whose heart pounded with fear and resolve, ready to break the silence that had chained him for years. The air in our small Midwest town carried the crisp bite of autumn, the scent of fallen leaves mixing with the faint smoke of distant bonfires. But inside the Kingdom Hall, the air was heavy with the weight of secrets, the creak of pews, and the murmur of prayers that felt more like pleas. It was a Sunday morning. The meeting just ended, the congregation spilling into the foyer with its familiar smells of coffee and hairspray. I stood by the coat rack, my hands trembling, my tie loosened at the neck. The unsigned letter I'd found in my watchtower. "You're not alone. Speak when you're ready," burned in my pocket, its words a spark that had grown into a flame. I couldn't keep silent anymore. Brother David Harper, the elder who'd haunted my life for 6 years, was at the podium, shaking hands, his smile as polished as his suit. The congregation adored him, but I saw the truth behind his eyes, the truth I'd carried since I was 12. I'd spent weeks planning this moment, my heart racing every time I imagined it. The elders, David, Brother Amos, and Brother Paul, held the congregation in a grip of authority no one dared challenge. Speaking against David meant risking everything, my family, my friends, my place in the truth. But the weight of his actions, the private Bible studies in that suffocating back room, had become unbearable. The letter gave me courage, a whisper that others might stand with me. I didn't know who wrote it, but it was enough to push me forward. I approached Brother Paul, the kindest of the elders, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a soft voice. He was stacking hymnals near the platform, his hands steady, his suit slightly wrinkled. The Kingdom Hall was nearly empty now, the last families lingering in the parking lot. "Brother Paul," I said, my voice shaking, barely above a whisper. He turned, his eyes gentle but curious. "Thomas, what's on your mind?" The words I'd rehearsed 100 times stuck in my throat, but I forced them out. "It's about Brother David. He's done things, to me, in the private studies." The air seemed to thicken, the hum of the overhead lights louder in the silence. Brother Paul's face changed, his eyes narrowing, not with anger, but with something heavier, disbelief, maybe fear. "Thomas," he said, his voice low, "that's a serious accusation. Are you sure?" I nodded, my hands clenching into fists, the letter crinkling in my pocket. "I'm sure. It's been years. I'm not the only one." The words hung between us, sharp and final. Paul's gaze darted toward the foyer where David was still talking, his laugh echoing. "This needs to be handled properly," Paul said, his tone cautious. "We'll call a judicial committee, but Thomas, you need to be certain. This could change everything." His words were a warning, but also a crack in the wall of silence I'd feared would never break. The judicial committee was set for the following week, a closed meeting in the back room of the Kingdom Hall. I barely slept, the hum of crickets outside my window a constant reminder of the nights I'd spent praying for strength. My parents noticed my distance, but didn't press. "You're quiet, Tommy," Mom said one evening, her hands kneading dough, the kitchen warm with the scent of yeast. I wanted to tell her, but the fear of her disbelief kept me silent. The wooden cross in my sock drawer felt heavier, a secret I wasn't ready to share. The day of the committee arrived, a cold morning in late autumn. The Kingdom Hall felt different, its familiar smells of polished wood and old books now tinged with dread. I sat across from the 3 elders, David, Amos, and Paul, in the same back room where it all began. David's face was calm, his Bible open on the table, his hands folded as if in prayer. Amos, stern and unyielding, led the meeting. "Thomas," he said, his voice like gravel, "you've made a grave accusation. Tell us exactly what happened." My heart pounded, my palms sweaty against the chair's worn arms. I told them everything, the private studies, David's hands, his whispered threats cloaked in Scripture. The words poured out, each one a weight lifted, but also a new burden borne. David didn't flinch. "Thomas is confused," he said, his voice smooth, his eyes meeting mine without a trace of guilt. "He's young, impressionable. Satan can plant ideas in a weak heart." The words cut deep, but I held his gaze, my voice steady for the first time. "I'm not confused. I know what you did." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Amos leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Without 2 witnesses, Thomas, your words are just that, words." Paul looked down, his hands clasped tightly, saying nothing. I felt the walls closing in, the truth I'd fought to reveal slipping through my fingers. The committee's decision came swiftly. Without corroboration, my accusation couldn't stand. David was cleared, his reputation untouched, but I was marked, labeled a troublemaker, a boy who'd let Satan into his heart. The elders didn't disfellowship me. but they might as well have. The congregation's warmth turned cold, eyes avoiding mine at meetings, whispers following me in the foyer. My parents were devastated, their faith shaken not by David but by me. "Why, Thomas?" Dad asked one night, his voice breaking, the kitchen table between us feeling like a chasm. I couldn't answer, not yet. The immediate consequence was isolation. Samuel, my best friend, stopped meeting me at the creek. "I can't, Tom," he said the last time we spoke, his eyes on the ground, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. "My dad says you're bad association." The word stung, sharper than any scripture. I stopped attending meetings regularly, each absence a step away from the life I'd known. The Kingdom Hall, once my home, became a place of judgment, its pews no longer a refuge, but a reminder of my failure. But the letter in my pocket, that shaky handwriting, kept me going. Someone believed me, even if the elders didn't. I held on to that, a flicker of hope in the darkness. The choice I'd made, to speak, to stand against David, had cost me everything I'd known, but it also set me free. The truth was out, even if it hadn't been heard. As I walked home that night, the stars above Willow Creek brighter than ever, I knew the fight wasn't over. The silence had been broken, but the wounds it left would take years to heal. The Kingdom Hall in Willow Creek, once the center of my world, had become a stranger's house. I was Thomas Mitchell, 18 years old in the late 1970s, a boy who'd spoken a truth no one wanted to hear. At 67 now, looking back, I see a young man standing on the edge of everything he'd known, his heart heavy with loss, but stirring with a fragile hope. The air in our small Midwest town carried the chill of early winter, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the damp earthiness of fallen leaves. But the weight of my decision to accuse Brother David Harper and face the congregation's judgment hung heavier still, reshaping my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. The Judicial Committee's ruling had marked me. Though I wasn't disfellowshipped, the congregation treated me as if I were. Faces that once greeted me with warmth now turned away in the Kingdom Hall's foyer, their whispers sharp as the creak of the pews. My parents, John and Margaret, were caught in a storm of confusion and shame. Dad's hands, rough from years at the hardware store, gripped the kitchen table tighter during our silent dinners. Mom's eyes, once bright with faith, were clouded with worry, her hands pausing over her sewing as she glanced at me. "Thomas," she said one evening, her voice trembling, the kitchen warm with the scent of baked apples, "why didn't you come to us first?" I wanted to explain, to tell her about the fear that had silenced me for years, but the words felt like stones in my throat. I just shook my head, the green tablecloth between us, a faded reminder of better days. My place in the congregation was gone. Meetings felt like walking into a room where everyone knew a secret I wasn't allowed to share. I stopped attending regularly, each absence a small rebellion against the life I'd been raised to live. The Kingdom Hall's polished wood and musty hymnals, once comforting, now felt like a cage. I'd walk past it on my way to the diner, its brick walls looming in the dusk, and feel a pang of loss for the boy who'd once believed in its promises. My copy of Learning from the Great Teacher, its pages worn from years of study, sat untouched on my desk, a relic of a faith I no longer understood. But there were small victories, too. The letter, "You're not alone. Speak when you're ready," remained my anchor, tucked in my pocket, its paper softening with each touch. I didn't know who wrote it, but it was proof that someone saw the truth, even if the elders didn't. I started seeking out others who'd left the congregation, people whose names were whispered as warnings. Michael, the quiet boy who'd worked at the diner, became my first ally. I found him one afternoon, wiping tables, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee. "Michael," I said, my voice low, "I told the elders about David." He froze, his rag still in his hand, his eyes meeting mine. "You did what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I told them," I said, my heart pounding. "They didn't believe me, but I had to try." He looked away, his jaw tight, but then he nodded. "You're braver than me, Tom." That nod, that fleeting connection, was a lifeline, a sign that my truth wasn't just mine. Michael shared his story, haltingly, over coffee at the diner's counter. He'd been in those private studies too, years before me. The shame had driven him out, away from the congregation and his family. "I couldn't stay," he said, his voice breaking, the clink of dishes in the background a stark contrast to his pain. But I couldn't speak either. His words were a mirror, reflecting my own struggle, but they also gave me strength. We weren't alone. There were others. Shadows in the congregation's margins, carrying the same wounds. That knowledge was a small victory, a crack in the wall of silence that had held me captive. The costs were heavy, though. My friendship with Samuel, my best friend, was gone. He'd stopped meeting me at the creek, his father's rules binding him tighter than ever. I saw him once outside the Kingdom Hall, his head down, his freckles faded under the weight of his father's expectations. I called his name, but he didn't look up, just hurried inside, the door slamming shut like a judgment. The loss cut deep, sharper than the elder's dismissal. Samuel had been my anchor, the one who'd made the congregation bearable. Now, he was part of the world I'd lost. My parents struggled to bridge the gap. Dad tried to talk to me, his voice softer than usual. One night in the living room, the air smelled of furniture polish, the clock ticking loudly on the mantel. "Thomas," he said, his hands clasped, "we raised you in the truth. What happened?" I wanted to tell him everything, to make him see, but the fear of breaking his faith held me back. I can't stay, Dad," I said, my voice cracking. He nodded, his eyes heavy, and said nothing more. Mom was quieter, her hands busy with sewing, but her glances were filled with questions she didn't ask. I started spending more time away from home, working odd jobs at the hardware store, the clink of nails and the scent of sawdust a new kind of comfort. I began rebuilding my life outside the congregation, a slow, painful process. I moved into a small apartment above the diner, its walls thin, the hum of the refrigerator a constant companion. I kept the wooden cross from my grandmother on a shelf, no longer hidden, its smooth wood a symbol of a world I was starting to explore. I started reading books the witnesses had forbidden, novels, philosophy, anything that spoke of freedom. Each page was a small act of defiance, a step toward a new kind of faith, not in an organization, but in myself. Sister Clara, the kind woman with the knitted shawl, became an unexpected ally. I ran into her at the grocery store, the air sharp with the smell of fresh produce. "Tommy," she said, her voice soft, her eyes searching mine, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry." I froze, unsure if she meant the committee or something more. "You don't have to say anything," she added, her hand gentle on my arm. "Just know you're not alone." Her words echoed the letter, and I wondered if she'd written it. I didn't ask, but her kindness was a balm to a reminder that not everyone in the congregation had turned away. I started connecting with others who'd left, meeting in quiet corners of Willow Creek, diner booths, park benches, anywhere away from the Kingdom Hall's shadow. There was Sarah, a woman in her 30s, who'd been disfellowshipped for questioning the elders. Her laugh was sharp, her eyes bright with defiance. "They want silence," she said one evening, the sunset painting the sky orange, "but silence doesn't heal." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my choice to speak, even if it failed, was a start. We shared stories, piecing together a network of survivors, each one a small victory against the organization's grip. The Kingdom Hall faded into the background, but its impact lingered. I'd walk past it sometimes, the windows dark, the brick walls a silent rebuke. I'd see David's car in the parking lot, his presence a reminder of the truth no one wanted to face. But I was learning to live without their approval, to find strength in the life I was building. I donated my old Watchtower magazines to the library, a symbolic gesture. Their pages no longer a weight on my heart. I kept the letter, though, folded in a drawer, its words a promise I wasn't alone. The early 1980s brought a new rhythm to my life. I worked full-time at the hardware store, my hands growing calloused like Dad's, the scent of lumber grounding me. I started attending a small community church, not because I believed everything they taught, but because it was a place where questions were allowed. The wooden pews there were softer, the hymns lighter, the air free of judgment. I was finding a new kind of faith, one that didn't demand silence, but embraced truth, even when it hurt. The wounds from the Kingdom Hall were still there, raw and aching, but they were starting to heal. I'd lost my family's trust, my best friend, my place in the world I'd known, but I'd gained something else, a voice, a truth, a life I could call my own. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking it on my own terms, the stars above Willow Creek brighter than ever, whispering of a hope I was finally ready to claim. Willow Creek in the mid-1980s was a town moving forward, its main street buzzing with new shops and the hum of progress. But for me, Thomas Mitchell, it was a place of endings and beginnings. I was in my mid-20s then, a man carrying the scars of a childhood spent in the Kingdom Hall's shadow. At 67 now, looking back, I see a journey that broke me but also rebuilt me, piece by painful piece. The air in our small Midwest town carried the scent of blooming lilacs and fresh asphalt, a reminder that life could grow even in cracked places. The Kingdom Hall still stood on the edge of town, its brick walls a silent witness to the truth I'd fought to speak, but I was no longer bound by its rules. The years after the Judicial Committee were a slow unraveling. The congregation's rejection had left me adrift, a stranger in the only world I'd known. My parents, John and Margaret, struggled to understand. Dad's hands, rough from years at the hardware store, would rest on the kitchen table during our rare conversations, his eyes searching mine for the son he'd raised in the truth. Mom's sewing machine hummed less often, her hands pausing over fabric as if stitching could mend what was broken between us. I'd moved out, living in a small apartment above the diner, its walls thin, the scent of burnt coffee seeping through the floorboards. The wooden cross from my grandmother, once hidden in a sock drawer, now sat openly on a shelf, its smooth wood a quiet defiance of the faith I'd left behind. I'd built a new life, one step at a time. The hardware store became my refuge, the clink of nails and the tang of lumber grounding me in a way the Kingdom Hall never had. I worked long hours, my hands growing calloused, my shoulders broader from carrying crates. I'd found a small community church, not for its doctrine but for its openness, its pews soft with worn cushions, its hymns free of judgment. The pastor, a man named Robert with a gentle laugh, welcomed questions, something the elders never had. One Sunday, as we stood outside the church, the spring air warm with the scent of cut grass, he said, "Tom, faith isn't about rules. It's about finding peace in your heart." I nodded, the words settling deep, a balm for wounds I'd carried too long. "I'm trying, Pastor," I replied, my voice steady. "It's a long road." His smile was kind, his hand light on my shoulder. "You're already on it. The letter, you're not alone. Speak when you're ready," remained a touchstone, folded in a drawer beside my bed. I never learned who wrote it, though I suspected Sister Clara, her kind eyes and knitted shawl, a memory that warmed me. I'd see her sometimes at the grocery store, her cart filled with apples and flour, and she'd smile, a silent acknowledgement of the truth we both knew. I kept in touch with Michael, the boy from the diner, and others who'd left the congregation. We met in quiet places, park benches, coffee shops. our stories weaving a fragile network of survivors. Sarah, the woman who'd been disfellowshipped, became a friend, her sharp laugh a reminder that joy could follow pain. "We're free, Tom," she said one evening, the sunset painting the sky gold. "They can't take that from us." Her words were a victory, small but real, a testament to the strength we'd found outside the Kingdom Hall's walls. The costs lingered, though. My relationship with my parents never fully healed. They stayed in the congregation, their faith unshaken, though Mom's eyes softened over time. One Christmas, years after I'd left, she sent a card, its envelope smelling faintly of her perfume. Inside she'd written, "We love you, Tommy, all was well." I held it, my hands trembling, the paper crinkling in the quiet of my apartment. I called her that night, the first time in years, and we talked about small things, the weather, her garden, Dad's new toolbox. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start, a bridge built on love instead of doctrine. Samuel, my childhood friend, remained a ghost. I saw him once, in the early 1980s, outside the Kingdom Hall, his face older, his eyes distant. I called his name, but he turned away, the door closing behind him like a final judgment. The loss ached, a wound that never fully closed, but I carried his memory like a pebble in my pocket, smooth from years of turning it over in my mind. The Kingdom Hall itself faded into the background of my life. I'd walk past it sometimes, its windows dark, the brick walls a reminder of the boy I'd been. Brother David Harper was gone by then, moved to another congregation, his reputation intact. The elders had buried the truth, but I'd learned it lived elsewhere, in the stories of those who'd left, in the quiet courage of those who'd spoken. I donated my old Watchtower magazines to a thrift store, their pages no longer a weight on my heart. I kept my grandmother's cross, though, and one day I hung it on the wall, its wood catching the morning light, a symbol of a faith I'd chosen for myself. By the mid-1980s, I was finding my place in Willow Creek, no longer as a witness, but as a man who'd survived. I volunteered at a community center, teaching kids to build birdhouses, the smell of sawdust and glue, a new kind of prayer. I'd sit with them, their laughter bright, and feel a peace I'd never known in the Kingdom Hall. The stars above Willow Creek, once cold and distant, now felt like companions, their light steady as I walked home at night, the air crisp with the promise of spring. This is a true story, shared by one of our subscribers. Thank you for trusting us with it. If you have a story you'd like to share, please leave it in the comments. We'd be honored to tell it on our channel. My journey wasn't easy, but it led me to a truth I could live with, one built on honesty and hope. As I stood in my apartment one evening, the cross on the wall glowing in the lamplight, the scent of coffee lingering from dinner, I realized I'd found something the Kingdom Hall could never give me, freedom to be myself, scars and all, under a sky that felt wide enough to hold every truth.